All right, welcome everyone. Today we're going to do something a little different. We're actually going to take a social science exam paper and use it as a map, a guide to explore this incredible interconnected world that we live in. We're not just here to find the right answers. We're going to crack the code and really understand the foundations of our society. So you ready? Let's dive in.
So, here's our game plan. We've got a 4-part journey ahead of us. We'll kick things off with a tour through history, then we'll jump into the rules that actually govern our society. From there, we'll map out our physical world, and we'll wrap it all up by exploring the economics of our everyday lives. Each section kind of builds on the one before it, so let's get this tour started.
Okay, first stop, history. This is where we look back at the people, the big events, and the ideas that literally built the world we're standing in today.
All right, let's hit our first set of questions, rapid-fire style. First up, what civilization is called the Blessing of the Nile? That's Egypt. And it's just such a perfect example of how geography can literally create a civilization, right? The Nile's floods made the desert bloom. Next, where are the teachings of Jesus Christ stored? The Bible. I mean, you can't really overstate how much that book has shaped Western culture. And what was Mahamata Buddha's childhood name? Siddhartha. This is important because it reminds you that this world-changing spiritual leader started out as a prince, totally sheltered from suffering. And finally, why did Mahmud Ghaznavi attack India? Well, it was about grabbing wealth, for sure, but it was also about spreading his ideology. And that's a theme you see again and again in history. People's motivations are almost never just one thing.
Okay, let's slow it down a bit and talk about social structure. This next question wants to know the 3 main classes in medieval Europe. Now, this isn't just a list of names. This was the blueprint for how millions of people lived and died for hundreds of years.
And here's that blueprint. Pretty much a pyramid. At the very top, you've got the clergy, those who prayed. They were the spiritual gatekeepers, holding immense power. Right below them, the nobility, or those who fought. These are your knights and lords, the ones who owned the land and were supposed to offer protection. And then, holding the entire thing up, was the massive base of the pyramid, the peasantry, those who worked. They were the engine of this whole system, but they had the fewest rights and the toughest lives. You know, this wasn't a social ladder you could climb. For most people, it was a rigid cage you were born into.
Now, let's jump way back in time, thousands of years, to the Saraswati Indus civilization. I mean, look at this list. It's just mind-blowing how advanced they were. We are talking about planned cities with grid systems, kind of like modern-day Manhattan. They had the world's first covered drains, the very beginning of sanitation systems. They were pioneers in cotton farming, which would go on to change the world. They had standardized weights and measures, which is absolutely essential for fair trade. These aren't just fun facts. These are some of the earliest blueprints for how to run a modern, organized city.
Okay, next up. This is a really important difference to get straight. Imperialism versus colonialism. What is it? Well, think of it this way. Imperialism is the idea. It's the grand policy, the ambition of a country to extend its power and influence. Colonialism is the action. It's the practice of actually going out, occupying another country, and exploiting its resources. So one's the thought, the other's the deed. Simple as that. So what lit the fuse for the massive revolt of 1857 in India? Well, it wasn't just one thing. You had political problems like the doctrine of lapse, a British policy that basically let them snatch up kingdoms. Then there was the economic pain, crazy high taxes that were destroying local businesses. On top of that, you had social and religious fears, a feeling that their way of life was under attack. And then came the final spark, the military trigger. That rumor about the new rifle cartridges being greased with pig and cow fat, which offended both Muslim and Hindu soldiers. The big takeaway here is that huge revolts like this are never about a single incident. They're the explosion at the end of a very, very long fuse.
Our last history stop is some map work. Chari Chara. That's where a protest turned violent, which led Gandhiji to call off the entire non-cooperation movement. Dandi, of course, is where he famously broke the salt law. Bombay was the controversial landing spot for the Simon Commission. And Goa is a prime example of a Portuguese colony in India. Each one of these spots is a critical chapter in the story of independence.
Okay, let's move on. How does all that history translate into the systems that run our lives today? Well, that brings us to political science. We're now exploring the rules, the structures, and the big ideas that shape how we all manage to live together.
All right, let's sprint through some core concepts here. Sri Lanka's independence in 1948, a huge moment in the post-colonial world. The USA is a classic coming-together federation, independent states that chose to form one nation. In India, reserving seats for women in local governments has been a massive step for gender equality. All political parties in India have to register with the Election Commission, the watchdog that keeps elections fair. The American Civil Rights Movement, of course, was led by the incredible Martin Luther King Jr. A multi-party system, like India's, means several parties can realistically win, which often results in coalition governments. And finally, a homogeneous society, like Japan, has very little ethnic diversity, which creates a totally different set of political challenges.
Now, what's so fascinating about Belgium is the story behind these numbers. You look at the country as a whole, and it seems simple, a Dutch-speaking majority. But the real political hotspot is the capital, Brussels. And there, the whole thing flips. It's majority French-speaking. That one fact created massive political tension, and it's why Belgium is the textbook case for why power sharing is so absolutely critical in a diverse country.
So why did feminist movements pop up all over the world? Well, it really boils down to a demand for equality in three key areas. First, political rights, most famously the right to vote. Second, social equality, the demand to be treated with the same respect as anyone else. And third, economic rights, the fight for equal pay for equal work and the chance to have the same opportunities. At its core, it's a fight for fundamental human dignity on every front.
This brings us to a huge question. What makes democracy a better form of government? And look, it's not because it's perfect. It's definitely not. Its real strength is in its core principles. It's built on the idea of promoting equality and dignity for its citizens. By including more voices, it usually improves decision-making, it gives us peaceful ways to sort out our conflicts, and maybe most important of all, it has a way to correct its own mistakes. It's a system that's designed to learn and evolve.
All right, we've talked about the rules of society. Now let's shift our focus to the physical stage where all of this human drama plays out. Welcome to geography, where we explore the planet itself and how we interact with it.
Let's just start with one big number, 30%. That's how much of India's surface area is covered by mountains. Now, that is not just a random fact. That single number dictates where rivers flow, which determines where people farm and build cities. It shapes weather patterns, which impacts the entire economy. It creates natural borders that have defined kingdoms for centuries. See? One number connects geography straight to history, economics, and politics.
Okay, let's bundle a few key geography ideas together. Black soil, which is also called Regur soil, is mostly found in Maharashtra, and it's perfect for growing cotton. Now, over in Punjab, a major cause of land degradation is over-irrigation. And this is such an important lesson. In the rush to grow more food, so much water was used that it actually damaged the land in the long run. And finally, renewable resources? They're simply the ones that nature can replenish, like the sun and the wind.
Let's dig a little deeper, literally. What's a mineral? It's just a substance that occurs naturally and has a specific internal structure. We usually group them into metallic, non-metallic, and energy minerals. Let's zoom in on iron ore because it is the absolute backbone of industrial development. Magnetite is the best quality stuff because it has the most iron in it. But hematite is the one that gets used the most in industry, making it incredibly important to the global economy.
And that brings us to our final destination on this tour, economics. This is where we see how everything else, the history, the politics, the geography, all comes together to shape the systems of money, work, and trade that define our day-to-day lives.
Here's a really interesting economic idea: disguised unemployment. So what is that? Basically, it's when you have more people working on a job than are actually needed. Think about a family farm. If you took 2 people away, the amount of crops they harvest might not change at all. It looks like everyone's employed, everyone's busy, but it's not actually productive work. Let's talk about borrowing money. You've really got 2 main options. On one hand, you have formal sources, like banks. They're supervised by a central authority, which means the rules are clear and the interest rates are lower. On the other hand, you have informal sources, like moneylenders. There's no supervision, and that can lead to crazy high interest rates that trap people in debt. The whole difference, the thing that really matters, is regulation. So why do we even use averages, like per capita income, to talk about a country's wealth? Well, they're a handy way to compare countries that have totally different populations. But, and this is a huge but, they have a hidden limit. Averages hide the truth about how that wealth is distributed. A country can have a really high average income that's just masking massive inequality, with a few billionaires and millions of people in poverty. So the key takeaway is that an average almost never tells you the whole story. And finally, when you're out there in the marketplace, what are your rights? Well, you have 5 fundamental rights as a consumer. The right to safety, so products don't harm you. The right to be informed, so you know what you're buying. the right to choose from different options, the right to be heard if something goes wrong, and finally, the right to seek redressal, which means you have the right to get a solution, like a refund or a replacement.
So, we've come to the end of our tour, and it all leads to this one last question. What's the connection between a historical revolt, a political rule, a geographical fact, and an economic principle? Well, I hope it's a little clearer now. They're all just threads woven into the same complex fabric of our society. The mountains shape the economy creates political tension, that tension explodes into a historical revolt, and the lessons we learn from that revolt help shape the democratic rights we enjoy today. The real code isn't in any one subject, it's in seeing the connections between all of them. Thanks for cracking it with me today.